Okay.
I am, but I mean, I think so, yeah. I don't know.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. We're going to have an extremely interesting and long session with a break. If it's just a short announcement so that you know what you prepare yourself for. And let me introduce our panelists today. Professor Zygmunt Bauman, philosopher. Leonidas Donskis, philosopher and member of the European Parliament. Juraj Buzalka, sociologist and anthropologist here at Comenius University. Peter Pomerantsev, a journalist and an expert on Russian political issues. And Aitor Tinoco, sorry, I kind of like lost it, yes. And he's a Spanish activist of 15N, and he'll tell us more about it. And first, the panel is about change. And I asked the panelists first to give us a short, which is like 5 to 6 minutes introduction on what their main story is. So they all bring their stories, their ideas, and just to sum up and kind of like give you a tease for the audience that we can go on and discuss in detail later on. We will talk about the events and the movements that are out there, and we try to interpret them. We will get to the achievements, if there are any, if it's all utopia, if it's social innovation or political change. And then finally, but I am sure there will be some interim discussions with the topic coming up. We will discuss the role of technology in organizing these new movements. So please, Professor Bauman, would you please give us an overview of what you think about these?
Oh, should I start? Actually?
Yes, please, please.
I didn't expect it. Well, I followed the... do you hear me? Sorry. You do? Right. I followed the briefing, and the briefing says, first of all, that we are speaking about the change, right? And secondly, that we should go to what? We should go behind the mass civic process and demonstration of the past 2 years in the East and the West. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to do, Madam Chairperson, if you allow me. And as an old person, I am allowed to start from reminiscing, remembering my young years. Young years, as you probably can gather, means a very, very long time ago by contemporary standards of living under tyranny of the moment. When I was young, and I repeat, it was very long time ago, I remember quarreling with my contemporaries about what is to be done. That was a tremendously important question for us. We differed in very many respects. We quarreled, we fought against each other, but there was, I don't remember ever, another questions to be asked, namely the question, who is going to do it? We were quarreling about what is to be done, but we were united in understanding, in belief that once we decide what is to be done, we know who will do it. Of course, the nation state. Of course, the state will do it. The state had all the necessary conditions of effective actions. And above all, it had in his hands power and politics. Power means ability to have things done. And politics means ability to decide which things ought to be done. Now, if both power and politics are in the hands of the nation state is obviously able to act. I mentioned my young years. My young years were 1920s and 1930s, really very long time ago. Particularly in the 1930s, I was already a big child and I could understand what was going on. And what was going on was a complete confusion. The unemployment, massive unemployment kept rising. No one came to the rescue for the time being. We are kept to be surprised by bad news day by day. But this disbelief in the self-propelling ability of progress, which it will somehow take care of all the troubles and repair them, was complemented by unhesitating, complete trust in the ability to act of the nation state. And of course, there was on the one side, there was communism, which introduced 5 years plans and promised to create the well-being of the whole of nation in a matter of few years. The big program of industrialization. There was the other kind of totalitarianism, Nazi Germany, and its followers around Europe, which promised to bring the heaven to earth by accomplishing very simple actions. There was Roosevelt in the United States of America who introduced New Deal, and America was even in a worse predicament than Europe, but still it was the state who took matters in their own hand and promised to repair things. That lasted, this belief in the state, in the power of the state, the sovereign power of the state on its territory to make things better. And the intention of the state and the ability of the state to take care of its own subjects. They are suffering, well, we make their life better. It lasted, this belief lasted, I think, till the end of 1960s or beginning of 1970s, when suddenly, in spite of all these precautions taken by the state, institutions set in place, which I call social state, commonly it is called welfare state, taking care of people living in misery, community ensuring every individual in the country against the pranks of the fate, misery, the bad luck, invalidity, old age, ill health, and things like that. And suddenly it all started to fall apart. The state seemed to be no longer able to deliver on its promises. Probably the power in its hands was too small or shrinking too fast to found this sort of activity. But then came Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, instructed by Milton Friedman and von Hayek, and they said, well, you see, state in the command of affairs is a very bad choice. Let's get rid of it. But there is another power, invisible hand of the market, which will set things right. And for the next 30 years, we lived under the illusion that that's exactly the case. We had the consumerist orgy. We spent money which we didn't earn. We spent money which even our grandchildren have not earned yet, and we'll have to repay. our costs of our consumerist orgy. And then came 2007 and the credit collapse, sudden credit collapse, collapse of banks, and again the same story repeated and keeps repeating itself, namely the rising unemployment, rising misery, rising inequality, the growing distance between the very few rich and the rest of the population. And however, the comparison of this present situation with that situation, with the situation of 1930s, very often it is made. I have read in quite a lot of newspapers the ideas that we are repeating the experience of 1930s. Well, we are not. We are not. With all the similarities, superficial similarities, like rising unemployment, growing misery, and uncertainty of fate, widespread, diffuse fear that we are not in control over our situation. Well, underneath all that set of similarities, there is one very big difference. That if in every previous crisis we believe that there is a workable, effective alternative, either state, either a market or whatever, now we are asking, feeling hopeless and feeling helpless and feeling confused, who is going to do it? I think that today the question, the venerable old question, what is to be done, is taking second fiddle to the question, who is going to do it? We look around and we can hardly find among the established institutions, in the parliamentary system, in the form which our democracy took over the years, created, put there in place by our ancestors, we look around and don't find any effective force which is able to do it. I think our time is a time of crisis, above all, the crisis of the tools, crisis of agency, crisis of agency. The hub of our unfortunate predicament at the moment is that none of the inherited extant institutions is up to the job. Up to the job, and why it is not up to the job? Well, it is not up to the job because the previous union of power and politics at the same level, at the level of nation-state, is not there anymore. A large part of powers emigrated, evaporated into the cyberspace, well beyond the reach of any particular nation-state, any particular government, however powerful the nation-state may be and however large the government may be, they are beyond their reach. They are beyond control. But the politics remained, as it was before, absolutely local. Namely, it is confined to the boundaries of the nation-state, territorial boundaries of the nation-state. So there is a growing hiatus, discrepancy between the grandiosity of the task and the means which are available to deal, to face the task, to deal with it, and to tackle the issues. I believe that what we call what the Spanish called the movimiento los indignados, the massive demonstrations, the decision to take in our possession the public squares or public streets for a time being until governments are forced to do something, are expressions of this sentiment, of this ambience of incapacity to act. the old means of doing things do not work any longer. But we don't know yet, we have no inkling, where to look for the new alternative means which could be more effective under the present circumstances, in the present kind of society, present kind of globalized planet, which could replace them. Now, we are experimenting. I understand this mass civic protest and demonstration of the past 2 years as the symptom of this desperate looking for alternative ways of effective collective action. Now, the big question, of course, is we are living in a sort of laboratory. It was not created by a decree. It just emerged because of the desperation caused by the bankruptcy of the old means of acting. So the big question is whether the means with which we are experimenting at the moment, they are the right ones. And here I would play an advocatus diaboli, if you allow me, and say that so far I don't have many proofs that we have already found them. Yes, we have very impressive manifestations of people anger, of people disenchantment, frustration, and will to change. And that may be very, very powerful force, but powerful force in removing, in cleansing, in cleaning, clearing the building site for the other alternative institutions which may replace them. As a negative force, these movements are quite effective, particularly in authoritarian countries, to be sure. Well, like in Egypt or Tunisia or in Libya, because authoritarian countries have one feature very important, that people appearing on the street without being sent there or without being invited are already in mortal danger. It is enough to do it yourself on your own initiative to frighten to death the ruling elite. Democracy is, however, much more apt to adjust itself to mass movements. It's very, very efficient in doing that. So the impact of such movements is still to be seen. First of all, they didn't show yet a proof of the ability to control the future. Well, yes, negative ability to clean the building site, yes, that has been sometimes in several cases proved. The ability to start building on this empty space is still to be seen. Secondly, its effectivity. Take Occupy Wall Street movement. Occupy Wall Street movement made tremendous impression on the newspapersmen, on TV cameramen. They were crowding to film, to record, to popularize their experience. The one place which did not notice the Occupy Wall Street movement was the Wall Street itself, which works exactly like it used to work before, as if nothing happened. That's a warning sign. Perhaps that is not all which we need. Perhaps we are still in the experimenting stage. Perhaps we should beware of jumping to the conclusions. There are other illusions which are accompanying our living today, like the digital revolution which was proclaimed by some people as the force working for democracy. Well, Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. There are very disquieting signs. I recommend to you the lecture of a book published by Evgeny Morozov, which is called Net Delusion. It has been published in America. It made tremendous impression, tremendous impact. This young man who is on doctorate studies in America on visit found out that all these proclamations about the coming age, new age of democracy, thanks to Facebook, thanks to Twitter, thanks to internet in general, that they were just the castles built on ice. That the dictatorial forces, authoritarian forces are as apt as the dissenters to use the opportunities which they give. What he found, for example, Hillary Clinton, the American equivalent of foreign minister, the Secretary of State, when people went to the street in Tehran protesting against the re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, as forged, as unjust, as corrupted elections, she proclaimed that as the first internet democratic revolution. And widely, this event in 2009 was described as the thugs of government shoot with bullets, and the dissenters reply shooting with Twitters. That's how it was formulated. In fact, Evgeny Morozov found out that at the time of the event, there were only 60 people in the whole of Iran who had access to Twitter. So clearly it couldn't be made by Twitter. It must have been made by old-fashioned means, like knocking to your neighbor's door, like telephoning, like sending word of mouth to incite other people to come on the street. While he also discovered for Ahmadinejad himself, it was gift from God, because thanks to the internet, he could immediately spot all the organizers of dissent and round them up, put them in arrest for the duration of the demonstration, and nip the rebellion in the bud. Chavez in Venezuela is on Facebook. You can find him very easily, and he already earned 500 million friends there. So he is using it in a very, very large fashion. I don't think that the lovers of democracy have actually reached this level of efficiency. In China, which is another authoritarian country, people speak about the 50 cents party, because the government found a way that for every block which sings the praise of the Chinese government, the author is given 50 cents in dollars. So it's a 50 cents party. Internet is a tool. And as tools, it can be used for different purposes and by different people who keep it in hand. So the conclusion, very simple and very short, because I have to finish. There are so many people who have much more interesting things to tell than I have. The conclusion is that technology, however sophisticated, won't make democracy for us. It is we who must find a way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So at the end, we can make like 15 minutes and also something about technology, I guess.
I'm sure we'll get back to technology. We have a lot to say, each of us with our individual stories. But may I just ask you to continue and give like a short wrap up how you see this, the problem of change and new movements. We'll get back to the technology part. So I really don't want us to start discussing it now, okay, because then we'll get lost in the sea of internet phenomena. Leonid?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, after Professor Bauman, of course, it's very tempting just to go along the lines and simply to try to follow, you know, those, I would say, trajectories of his thought, which are very inspiring and very eye-opening. So I will start with a very Lithuanian story. So, and I think everybody knows at least something about the Baltic Way. The Baltic Way, which was the living chain of people who held one another from Tallinn to Vilnius, and that was 700 kilometers, and that was quite impressive. Many people were moved. And the question was whether Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia would be able to repeat this miracle again in its history. And most of people agree that it only happens once in a lifetime. So it's for one generation, it's only possible to experience something like this once. So, but in any case, what was at the time was that people sincerely, very, very strongly and passionately believed in the state. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia lost their statehood and independence, you know, much around the same time when the Soviet Union simply devoured the rest of East and Central Europe. But what happened was that the memory worked in such a way that people expected this to happen sooner or later. When Lithuania became independent, it was the first breakaway republic in the Soviet Union. People deeply believed in the state, and there were very interesting insights into some possible imperfections, some sort of disenchantment, disappointment, because people understood that after this euphoria, this great public euphoria, there would be a disappointment, because no state deems to be perfect, of course, and there would be some shortcomings and problems. And yet what was happening was that it was very much of acceleration of history. Over the 20 years, what happened that the Baltic states became NATO and EU members, and had anybody told me in 1991 that Lithuania would become an EU country in 2004 or a NATO country, I would have responded by saying that the person in question lost sense of reality, of course. But this happened. And what is interesting that over the past 20 years, acceleration of history, acceleration of change, acceleration of time produced acceleration of resentment, disappointment, disenchantment. And I think if you have a look at Lithuanian or some other East European, but especially Lithuanian, because it's an interesting country in the sense that it's an EU country, it's more safe, secure than any time in its past. And yet many people are convinced that Lithuania produced the worst kind of nightmare. It's a very bad state. Many Lithuanians believe that this is a very bad state. And I would say that in the sense of Jean Baudrillard, it's a kind of simulacrum. We think that our state is bad or failed or disappointing. The fact remains, it is hidden by this structure of thought, that no state can respond adequately to those challenges that came to these new democracies. And in fact, many states look very much like this. But what is interesting is that, in fact, I try to understand what happened in East European politics, analyzing my country. And I have to say that what is very, very obvious is that there is no, what I would describe as a future project. There is no, I would say, the alternative vision. And this is quite symptomatic of what is happening nowadays, because we have many resentment protests, we have many movements, many demonstrations. They happen everywhere. They happen in more or less democratic countries, they happen in authoritarian, dictatorial countries and societies. But previously we knew that every movement was motivated by, if not a political doctrine, then at least a utopian vision, a dream. Now I think utopia is dying. It's simply bowing out. It's dying before our eyes. And I believe that the principle of imagination as such is simply surrendering to the principle of reality. And I can explain you what I mean by this. to remember a great Hungarian sociologist, Karl Mannheim, who wrote in his Ideology and Utopia that utopia is a kind of very warm anticipation of some things that may happen in the future. But once utopia is fulfilled, when utopia is implemented, it becomes an ideology. And this is what happened to most of ideologies, having started or having emerged as utopian visions, utopian designs. They were confined to some sort of ideological designs. But I have to say that what is happening nowadays, it's not about ideology. It's a resentment movement, which means that people fail to understand what is happening around them. They don't understand the state anymore. The nation state experiences many challenges, very aptly described by Professor Bauman, that we have global challenges and global problems, and there are no local solutions. And no nation state can embrace or to provide some adequate responses to those global challenges. And for instance, take human rights. There are people who suggest that human rights represents the last utopia of the Western world. Samuel Moyn of Columbia University suggests that this is very much the case. But in fact, what is happening is that this is clearly a lack of agency and lack of any kind of national policy. We know that Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and other global NGOs are very effective and very, very welcome when it comes to human rights situations and analysis, Freedom House, you name it. But the nation state, in many cases, acts inadequately. It's simply behind many developments. It simply observes. And we have a series of fait accompli, and there is no leadership. And this is a very clear situation and very clear illustration of the fact that a very sad fact is that there is no policy. There is no response. And at the same time, I have to say that very much the same happens to what we describe as change. What kind of change is that? Normally, we would assume that changes, this acceleration of time, acceleration of social, political change, is about democratic participation of people. So normally, every change should be subscribed, endorsed by people. We have a series of unendorsed, unsubscribed changes. And I think that a perfect illustration would be the higher education reform in many European countries, which goes totally unsubscribed, unendorsed by academics. Nobody agrees with it, but it happens. It happens anyway, meaning that we have a series of fait accompli. And this is not about your participation in this change. The change is simply ahead of you, and then you have to stick with it. We know that there is a classical expression by Karl Marx, which was very favored by people who try to simplify, the whole story of the 19th century, and they loved this 11th thesis of Karl Marx on Ludwig Feuerbach, that up to now, philosophers were trying to explain the world. But the point, however, is to change it. I would propose to reverse this. Up to now, ideologists were trying to change the world. The point is, however, to explain it once and for all. So I think how to arrest the change, I'm not suggesting to get back to Plato's dream, how to arrest social change, but I am saying that change doesn't mean anything until there is legitimacy, endorsement, inclusion. But when we have a series of fait accompli, so this is a sort of very strange situation. An incompetent state in the face of global challenges, the state which simply doesn't have any answer. And this ambivalence is simply permeating and showing, very, very strange and ambiguous sides of this process. Take, for instance, technology. I guess we will have a special segment of this discussion with technology, but very simple example is people rely on IT or technologies as a great democratic possibility. What Professor Bauman told us, in fact, could be illustrated by the European Parliament debates about digital freedom, digital democracy, online democracy, you name it. But the fact remains that IT technologies, including cell phones, allowed state security services to spy on their citizens. And I could give you ample evidence, even from my country, from Lithuania, which is a formally democratic country. It increased the possibilities to spy on citizens, to report and spy on journalists or media people who are described as lacking in loyalty, for instance. It provided new chances for surveillance. We live in societies of mass surveillance, which is un secret de polichinelle, so to say, which is a public secret. So it has a very ambivalent story, very ambivalent side, and that's why I would say that we live in a situation when we have to rethink it very, very carefully. I would argue, and this is my final point in this segment of our discussion, that in fact, it's not about utopias. I'm just afraid that we don't live in the world of utopias any longer. It's not about utopia, that's resentment. That's the cri du coeur. It's a kind of desperation. It's a kind of resentment and desperation in the world which is faceless, heartless, which doesn't have agency, where responsibility becomes a very, very rare commodity. Nobody is responsible in this world. And we have individualism in economy, or individualism by default, where we are unable to explain this world. We say, we're all individuals. Well, just let's come and think about it. But in fact, it's a very, very strange time, and I believe that a public secret is that a modern state, a nation state, in many ways is simply unable to control this reality. I'm used by many discussions in Lithuania. You know that my small country, I wouldn't say lost, but experienced a very deep change. More than 500,000 people, around 700,000 people left Lithuania over the past 10 years. So it's a new exodus. And Lithuanians who used to live in Chicago, Illinois, so now they choose the UK, Spain, Ireland. So I think that 500,000 people live in Ireland alone, so Lithuanians. So, and still our government thinks how to develop the program of making Lithuania attractive, you know, stopping this emigration. And the fact is that the Lithuanian nation is no longer a territorial nation. In an ex-territorial nation, which is, as a matter of fact, what happened to us. And still we try to apply all discourses, old cliches, worn-out instruments, and nobody believes them. And this is how it goes. And that's why we're trapped between the necessity to sound plausible in our country, to sound plausible for our society, and to respond adequately to global challenges. You have to be adequate in Spain, in the UK, in Lithuania, as a European. At the same time, you have to come up with a plausible story in your society. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I'm just afraid that this is a fundamental conflict. You have to make up your mind that you choose one of them, or at least to reconcile them in such a way that you could sound logical and consistent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to ask Aitor, because he has to leave. Are you ready? Yeah. Okay, because he asked me to let him speak later.
Yeah.
You had very provocative statements. Now it's your turn, right?
No, not that provocative. Well, I will focus, since I'm the only activist in the panel, but also in the interconferences, on the perspective, on the experience of the 15M movement, which is mainly new as Indignados movement in Spain, no? And I will start with a description, and later on I will link it with all the things that we have been talking here before. Firstly, how do we start it? We started on in March 2011, and we started in Facebook, but I'm not going to talk about this. We will talk about technologies later on, no? And we did it in a context which it was characterized for the effects of the crisis, of the austerity, no? Which is also a consequence of the debtocratic governance of the Troika, no? For making just some statistical appointments, I will say that the unemployment in Spain, it's the 22% of the people. If we are seeing from the young people, from 18-year-old to 35-year-old, it's 53% of the people. We have every day 500 evictions of families by the banks, but also for the state, which is allowing this. 500 families per day. It's very, very incredible. And also that we have 9 suicides per day. No? After this social context, which is important, it's also to understand the pre-electoral, the political context in Spain. No? We were calling to this demonstration on the 15th of May because the 22nd of May there were the municipal elections. No? And we were also criticizing this bipartitism, no? Between Partido Popular, which is the conservative right-wing party, which is the the heritage of the Franco's dictatorship, okay? And also we have Partido Socialista, no? Which is like the Social Democratic Party, but okay, like in all Europe there is no any social democratic parties now, no? So we started in that context, no? There were a lot of indicators of political institutional disaffection, corruption, and well, there is many other factors to take in account. No? But what is important is the challenge that the 15M movement was trying to express, no? That we were doing in the streets, that we were doing with the demonstrations, taking the squares, no? Which it was the democratic legitimacy of the political regime, no? And this is expressed in some of our mottos, no? Like they call it democracy, but it's not. It's a dictatorship. This is what it is. Or they don't represent us, no? And this is the point. No? We don't want to change in the system. We want to change the system. And this is the point. We are not anti-system. It's the system which is against us. And this is the point. Okay. So what we wanted, it was this change, no? And we wanted this change based in what we call the radicalization of democracy, no? A direct democracy, a participatory democracy, and a horizontal democracy, no? And we were calling to the mobilizations of the 15th of May with three mottos, no? Democracia Realia, which is the name of the collective in which I was participating that started all the 15M movement. And when we were saying Democracia Realia, real democracy now, we were expressing the desire of reappropriation of the politics through this radicalization of democracy, no? Direct, participatory, horizontal. And this is very important, no? Because we are in a world, okay, that the most part of the countries, they have formal democracies, no? So asking for real democracy, it's in itself really, from my point of view, really radical, no? So we have this radical questioning, asking, no, for the democratic system, no? And also this is the point, no? We are not a social movement, no? It's not people that we are mobilizing against one social specific problematic, no? It's for the whole context, no? And it's not just young people, it's all the citizens, all the society who is being involved in this, no? Just for taking in account, it's like the 70% of the people, they support the 15M movement, no? And for example, the Partido Popular, who is governing now, they only have the 18% of support of the population in Spain, no? So we were doing this one first motto, Democracia Realia, real democracy now. The second one, it was, we are not goods in the hands of politicians and bankers, no? Like this, we were expressing our autonomy, respect the market and also the state, no? And we were also denouncing three things, no? The servilism of the state and the public to the private, no? And in that sense, I also want to comment, no, what Professor Bauman was saying before, no, about sovereignty of the nation states. Now, the nation states, they don't have any sovereignty. We have been witnessing a double displacement, no? First displacement to the up, no? From the state to the international organizations. And a second displacement, which is from the state to the market, no? And this is the point. We are seeing an indifference between state and market, between public and private, because the state, the public, is serving the private, the market, no? This is why it's so important, this new paradigm that we are proposing, which is the commons, no? And we have to work on this European common fare, no? Also, you were saying before, well, I will go back this later, no? But the thing, we were saying we are not goods in the hands of politicians and bankers. So we were denouncing this servilism of the public and the state to the market, but also we were saying we were claiming against the kidnapping of democracy for the Troika's governance, no? Which is also materialized through the bailouts and his doctrine, shock of doctrine with the bio-policies of austerity, no? But also a third thing, which is the depredation and expropriation of all the common goods and common wealthy through these austerity policies, consequence of this governance, no? And then a third motto, which it was, take the street, no? So we were calling to the action, starting with the reappropriation of the public spaces, no? So doing this, with these three shots, insurrectional shots, we were creating a new imagery, a new common imagery in an atomized society, which was really fragmented, no? So we were creating a new imagery for this social body, no? And this is one point of the changes, no? The political change, no? Because we were saying this, and we were against these big dogmas, no? Of the we were saying like we are apartidistic. We are not saying we are anti-political parties, but we are apartidistic, so also autonomy from the political parties, and also trade unions, which is not anti-trade unions, but okay, we also have autonomy from the trade unions. Like this, what we were doing is to break down this, for put it in the words of Lyotard, no? The meta-récit of the representation, no? And this is the point, no? What we were saying, it's like the utopia of representation is dead. This is why we are claiming for direct democracy, for real democracy, no? So the 15th movement, it was a prise de parole, no? That it was articulated as a base of a new way of thinking and of doing politics, no? That we were breaking also the monopoly of the imagery of the political culture hegemonic in Spain for 30 years, the transitional culture, no? And it was expressed through this desire of reappropriation of the politics through the direct participation, no? So the emergence of the 15th movement, it puts on the table some radical questions, but not only in the formal dimensions, no, of the representative politics, but also in the dispositive of the governmentality of the power, no? And that will be that point. I'm sorry because I'm changing all my presentation here. So also...
Yeah, but it's just go a bit slower because I am losing you.
Oh, really?
And I'm afraid that some of
I'll try. No, I'm doing a lot of jumps. Well, and this is the point, no? Later we will explain how important is technology in all this process, no? From the composition, how it started, and also what are the potentialities of internet and the new technologies and this reappropriation of democracy and the empowerment of the people, no?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm going to talk a little bit about Russia, quite specifically, and maybe like the crooked Baroque mirror that Russia is, maybe some of the details I talk about will reflect the larger questions that my colleagues have raised. I'm very excited to be here and talking about change and protest in a place that was a crucible of change in the 20th century. Last night, I had a few glasses of wine with one of the leaders of Charter 77, and she said something which I found very powerful. She said that for protest movements to be effective, they have to modify themselves and focus on the power that they are opposing, which I thought crystallized so many issues that I had swirling in my head. I think everybody needs to come to sort of a Eastern Europe occasion and relearn the lessons of the 70s and 80s. So how does that apply to Russia? We have a very strange situation in Russia. I write about Russia quite a lot, so I'm not quite I'm an observer, but I spent a lot of time there. We have something that has become known as a postmodern dictatorship, a completely new type of sort of authoritarian strategy, which doesn't really allow you to act against it in the way other sort of opposition strategies would have allowed you to protest. Put very simply, maybe I can explain what postmodern dictatorship is through its architect, a man called Vladislav Surkov, who was the grey cardinal of Putin for 10 years. And he's, if I just describe a day in his life, maybe you'll understand the difficulty of fighting this. So Surkov is a former theatre director, a bohemian, a former quasi-dissident, who basically sold himself to the Kremlin, a former PR guy, obviously, an advertising guru. So in the morning he gets up and he goes, "Papang, I create a pro-fascist youth group, which is going to attack the liberals, attack modern art galleries." And then he gets to lunch and he goes, "And now I will sponsor a modern art movement," which is so radical, so crazy in its freedom and liberalism that all the liberals feel so free in the world that I have created. And then he goes, "I think I'm going to now do a little television where Putin is like a monarch." And this feeds this sort of another aspect of the Russian soul. So to sum it up, it's instead of suppressing, it's a case of owning all the ideologies. So he's talking human rights language 1 second, he's talking neo-fascism the next second. There is nowhere where you can stand, there is no way you can oppose him, because he's everywhere. So the human rights person starts talking about human rights, and she's like, oh my God, I'm talking Surkov's language. And he's like this puppet master that crawls into every discourse. There is no opposition because he is the opposition. So in this space, where he owns all the language, what does the opposition do? And over the last year, I'll just put some sort of ways that Russian opposition movement has been trying to counter this. So the first one, if all language is owned, if all ideologies are owned, if there are no more utopias which haven't become simulacrum of themselves, then how do you talk about politics? And there's been a drive to kind of create not a new language, but concretize politics as much as possible, talk about very, very specific, tiny issues, talk about numbers, talk about roads, which have become a metaphor for the rest of the political system. There's also been a drive to create new institutions. There's been several enlightened oligarchs who've been creating new institutes, which have been fostering different ways to talk about politics, which are different for Russia. Let's say, I'll give one example, just to be specific. There's an art institute, art and architecture institute, sponsored by a very, very rich Russian guy, sits in the middle of Moscow, called Strelka. A very louche kind of place, quite decadent. Rem Koolhaas teaches there, a lot of people who talk about architecture. You'd think they're talking about architecture. They're not talking about architecture. They're talking about politics through architecture. It's one of the few spaces you can still talk about politics. And so, a very specific example, they introduced into Russian the concept of public space. It didn't exist in Russian before. They spent a long time finding the right word for it. In the end, they choose общественное пространство, which is almost a civic space. They were talking about gardens and squares. Actually, they're talking about taking back the politics. And this then became one of the slogans of the movement. So this is one of the many different strategies that are being searched for, how to fight this very, very playful and yet obviously also very terrifying sort of version of dictatorship that the Kremlin has developed. So maybe later we'll talk about those different strategies, which are successful, which have failed. Most of them fail. It's Russia. Things are pretty bad. But surprisingly, some work. So there are some bright hopes for the future.
Thank you. I just want to assure the audience who might have not been present yesterday and the day before that you ask any panelist and she or he would say that things are pretty bad. So whatever country. It can be Russia and it can be Lithuania and it can be Hungary. But I hope then we'll go on and get the specific details of how bad it is, where. Juraj. Juraj is going to speak in Slovak. Please.
Ďakujem. Takže ja si dovolím hovoriť svojou rodnou rečou. A ospravedlňujem sa teda spoludiskutérom, že musia používať tlmočnícke zariadenie. Takže ja som sociálny antropológ a v posledných rokoch sa venujem široko povedané takému vzťahu medzi trhom a tým, čo by sme mohli nazvať sociálne hnutie alebo sociálny protest. Robil som výskum prednedávnom medzi robotníkmi, medzi oceliarskými robotníkmi spolu s inými kolegami v Európe aj v Latinskej Amerike. A keď som vlastne rozmýšľal o dnešnom paneli, tak mi do oka padol tá programová esej Martina Šimečku, tohtoročného teda fóra, kde teda ma zaujala jedna veta hneď v úvode, ktorú povedal. On tam teda citujem: povaha sveta je ukrytá v inom priestore, než sú rámce režimov. A sa mi tak páčilo. Neviem ešte, kde ten priestor nájsť, ale myslím si, že tiež by som chcel hovoriť niečo o takomto veľkom pláne, ale nie nejakom veľkom konšpiračnom pláne, ale možno nejak historicizovať to, čo už niektorí moji predrečníci tu povedali. Teda keď sa venujem trhu, tak by som rád niečo priniesol možno o debate vlastne do akého druhu spoločnosti vlastne ten trh dospel. Respektíve opačne. Akú spoločnosť vlastne ten globálny trh vytvoril. A chcel by som teda hovoriť o pár možno menách, možno ekonomických antropológov, ktorí vo všeobecnosti sa odvolávajú na známeho stredoeurópana, pôvodom teda ako základ také uvažovania o ekonomii v antropológii sa odvíja od Karla Polanyi, teda najmä od jeho úvahách o dvojitom hnutí ako produktu vlastne reakcie na trh, ako obrany spoločnosti proti trhu a naopak, teda súčasť modernej spoločnosti. Čo som chcel povedať? Kdesi som čítal prednedávnom, že napríklad v roku 89 sa na svete objavila miliarda nových robotníkov. Ono sa to zdá paradoxné, lebo vo vyspelých krajinách klesá podiel manuálne pracujúcich, veľmi sa rozširuje, povedzme, sektor služieb. U nás je navyše aj veľmi veľa ľudí nezamestnaných vo východnej Európe. Ale keď k tomu prirátame krajiny, ako je India, Čína a tak ďalej, jednoducho tieto čísla niečo s tým svetom musia robiť. Takže je to špecifická situácia a druhá špecifická vec, ktorú som si požičal od známeho amerického antropologa Stephena Goodemana, ktorý píše hodne o dialektickom vzťahu medzi trhov a spoločenstvom alebo komunitou, on to volá komunita, je vlastne, že nikdy v histórii, on to niekde spomína, že nikdy v histórii sme vlastne nezažili situáciu, že by vlastne to, čo on nazýva kalkulatívny rozum, penetroval do takého množstva oblasti každodenného života ako dnes. Nie, že by tu nebol trh aj predtým, ale nikdy nebol tak intimne blízky v sférach, o ktorých sme kedysi ani netušili, že môže ovplyvňovať. Teraz neznamená, že by sme mali nejak zrušiť trh, alebo že nebodaj máme urobiť nejakú socialistickú revolúciu vo východnej Európe, myslím, máme dnes jasno, viac možno ešte ako na západe, ale hovorí to o tom, že proste tá adaptácia možno na tú penetráciu tých trhových princípov, a hovorím to aj v zrkadle vlastne súčasnej krízy, alebo toho, čo je predchádzalo, lebo predsa len to nejde len o posledné 2-3 roky, ale aj o to, ako to už profesor Bauman začal, od toho, jak Clinton to povedal, it's all about economy, stupid, to som si zapamätal, ale vlastne od Thatcherovej, od Reagana, vlastne akým spôsobom sa svetová ekonomia, alebo svetové hospodárstvo za posledných 20-30 rokov zmenilo. Takže možno tá paradigma je aj niekde, tá zmena paradigmy je aj tu. A prečo som vlastne tým začal? Lebo si myslím, že každé hnutie, moderné hnutie, asi sa všetci teoretici zhodnú, že má také 3 kľúčové charakteristiky, alebo 3 úrovne. Jedna je teda táto nejaká makroštruktúrna, makrospoločenská, globálna by sme to mohli nazvať. To znamená, že naozaj dochádza k nejakým transformáciám, ako je napríklad reálna existencia miliónov ďalších robotníkov na svetovom trhu. Potom je tu nejaká tá takticko-ideologická, potom je tu tá rovina nejakých narratív, identít, o tom, kto sme a kam ideme. Takže len keď sa tieto 3 veci stretnú, tak vznikne hnutie. Čiže skončím iba tým pre tentokrát, že potrebujeme vlastne si ten veľký plán nejak rozobrať. Že čo historicky špecifické sa nám tu vlastne uložilo okolo nás. Čo vplyvňuje vlastne tie hnutia.
Thank you. Just to have another case to work with, I would I know it's not exactly the task of a moderator, but I would just quickly throw in our protests and demonstrations from Hungary, so that we have something to work with, and declare efficient or inefficient. So I just wanted to tell you the story of the recent big demonstrations in Budapest, which started actually on Facebook, but I'm not going to talk about that. And I was one of the organizers of the first 3 such demonstrations, and this relates to my next questions. My experience is that you can start a demonstration with grassroots activists. At a certain point, it has to reach some kind of institutionalized form, so that it can have some rules, some basic principles of legitimacy, a structured message. And then you realize that the further you go along with institutionalization, the less you like the funny, nice dilettanti who joined up with you at the beginning to have some fun in the street, the more problem you have there. And the final, or one final outcome might be that such a grassroots organization will try to fit in with the existing political system, because there is not, it cannot actually replace it. So it tries to fit in and struggles with finding the novelty or the voice or the special perspective that it brought when it was born from like really grassroots, sometimes very inexperienced and naive and funny people. So my question to you would be now, what are the achievements? How far you can get with these movements? I mean, in your respective experiences.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
No, I talked to here, yes,
yeah.
No, okay. So for me, the most important achievement, it has been the change in the political culture, no? And this is also related again with the technology, no? Because now with Facebook, we are used to say if I like it or not. It's also related with Twitter, no? With Twitter, you can also make retweet and spread a message and construct this imagery, no? But also you have the blogs that we were talking also yesterday in another panel, no? So you can also express yourself. This is this free of speech, no? So the people is starting to have this new culture of direct participation thanks to the internet and social networks, no? So
can you give me an example? Direct participation in what?
Participation in what?
In what?
In everything, in all the spheres of life, you can participate. No?
But just like a very concrete, simple example, what would people do?
Okay, how we can organize ourselves in a constituent process, for example, no? Or what are our demands? When, for example, we were in the squares, we were living a pre-constituent process. We were saying, okay, we want these rights, we want to reappropriate this common wealth and this common goods, and how we can organize ourselves to have this, no? And we have all this, not only in the squares, but also in the technopolitical infrastructures that we gave ourselves, no? With these autonomous social networks, not Facebook, not Twitter. No? This is important. We have to be there because the people is there. So if we want to spread our message, we have to be there. But the real participation, the real organization, the real work is taking place in our social networks, which are autonomous, no? This N-1, basically, but this is the place that we are working, no? But this is the thing, no? We cannot understand the 15M movement without internet and the technological infrastructures, no? Why? Because we have to understand this new paradigm, which is technopolitics, and also the phenomenology of the internet, no? Through the internet, it flows, no? The communication, the knowledge, the effects, no? All these elements, life elements that conform our subjectivity, no? But at the same time, they are components of the social immaterial production, no? And at the end, what is the commons, no? And from the point of view of the 59 movement, what we are witnessing is like the internet, it's an open space, it's a common space, and a space which is cohabitated, no? And a space which is shared, but that allows you the construction of this imagery and this auto-organization of the productivity in common, no? But at the same time, internet, it's so important for its open character, no? The internet allows this intersubjective, no? Communication between these singularities that they were separated, atomized, fragmented before, no? So this is a very important point of view, no? Because it's like an open interface that allows the auto-aggregation of these singularities. And you can do this not being in a political party, not being in a trade union, not being in any social center. You can just directly start participating in these communities, in these social networks, no? So this is very important, no? So all this, it's facilitating the emergence of one thing, which is the self-consciousness of net, the net consciousness, no? And this is a breaking point, no? An inflection point, and how the citizen movements, they are having this network conscience, and how they are all linked, and how we can all work together, no? And we saw it also in Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street, how it started. We started in the 59 movement, no? And we were also thinking in the 15th of October, like the next big demonstration that it will be all around the world, no? And not only in Spain, no? What we wanted to do it was to open a revolutionary code. That was the idea, no? So we were working on that, no? And the thing is that we wanted to make this on the 15th of October, and we were thinking in the United States, they wanted to do it, but it was difficult, no? So we needed to warm it up a little bit, no? So we were thinking in this action that it was going to the stock exchanges, but it was not only in Occupy Wall Street, it was also in Barcelona, in Madrid, but in Frankfurt, London, we were surrounding all the stock exchanges. What was the point? That in United States, it not was only the warming up of the 15th of October, because the people, they started to participate. But why they started to participate? Because they saw that the people was beaten and also detained, no, in the Brooklyn Bridge. 400 people, they were arrested, no? So also it's important, this thing of the media, no? The media only goes there when there is a big demonstration and when the police is beating citizens, no? So this was very, very important, no? But also, what I was talking before, no? This new paradigm of technopolitics, no? When I'm talking about technopolitics, I'm talking about new forms of organization, communication, but also action, no? Organization, no? It's technological, no? These logics of the technologies, structuration, no? Based in this working common and this distributed general intellect, no? It's like we are gathering all this common general intellect to work on this, and this, no? This is very important. The second point, the communication.
I'm just a very simple person, so can you tell me if you would be able to organize a school, say, or some kind of social service through 15 and?
Yeah, for example, what we are trying to do, what is our main goal, the thing that we want to achieve, no? That it was more or less the question, is to make a constituent process, no? What is a constituent process? It's to redefine the rules of the game, no? And how we have to think about this, no? We have to think it basically in three dimensions, no? The material and the social one, which is the reappropriation of the common goods, the common wealth, that allows, no? The access, the effective and open access to the rights, no? And when we are talking about common goods and common wealth, we are also talking about social service, education, for example, the right to the health, no, through the sanitary system, the healthcare system, no. This is a commonwealth, no. Also, a second dimension, no, which is the subjective dimension, the dimension of the rights, no, that guarantees the welfare of living of the people and also the personal autonomy of the citizens, no. So we want to reivindicate, to claim for a European Charter of the Commons, no? But also a territorial and cultural dimension, no? That at the European level it will be, how do you say, a federated link, not statocentric. This is very important, and base it, no, in this how do you say, recognition, but also to get this, to be a strength, to get more strength of the diversity, no? Diversity about the origin, territorial, cultural, linguistical, religious diversity, no? And the fourth dimension, it will be the democracy and the governance, no? Which is based in this common management of the common goods, no? And this will be an open, shared, decentralized governance, no? And this is the point now with the technological, this new technopolitical paradigm, we can participate at any time from everywhere, and we can say what we want to say at any moment, no? And the thing is why the government or the institutions, they are not listening to us, and this is the point. We need to think in new forms of institutionalization of the commons, no? And base it in this radical democratic participation.
Thank you. We are going to have the break in 15 minutes. So I ask Peter and Juraj, if you don't mind, to hold your stories, because Aitor has to go, and just react to what he had to tell us now. Because I think that's, as far as I understand, that's a full-blown utopia that you are actually organizing online, but I am not the one to say.
Well, you have already said it, but...
Yeah, all right. But I really would like to know, I really would like you, with your expertise and background, to tell us.
The utopias to believe in representation nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that our chairperson put her finger on the heart of the matter, really. Very important paradox which haunts every social movement, and particularly massive social movements, including the social movements we are discussing today. That is the paradox between, on one hand, necessity for the sake of efficiency, necessity of institutionalization, and on the other hand, institutionalization being by its nature a trap destroying the spontaneity and the sources of power of this very movement which we are discussing. The spokesmen for Occupy Wall Street are on record confiding in the journalists who at the beginning were tremendously interested. It was a hot news, and they interviewed everybody who was willing to speak, and they were, the spokesmen were boasting, actually. Look, how really our movement is a folk movement. It has no leaders. We have no leaders. We are all in here. We are all equal. We are all speaking. They probably didn't realize that the success of the mass of people staying in Zuccotti Square for such a long time was, among other things, due to the fact that there were no leaders. If there were leaders, leaders by definition lead. So leaders by definition know not only where from they are running away, but also where to they are going. Now, if you put on the table the question, where to are we going, the mass immediately splits into people of various interests. The occupiers of Wall Street prided themselves that they represent 99% of Americans. But then came the presidential elections, and we saw it quite clearly how split right in the middle American society is. They representatives of all walks of life, of all stations, could stay together in neighboring tents in Zuccotti Park only because they suspended for the time of staying there their differences. They didn't discuss them. They not speaking about the model of good society is actually the condition of such movements being imaginable, being conceivable. That is the paradox. And how to avoid it? I can only suggest what Richard Sörös, the great sociologist, probably the greatest alive, a few months ago announced in Hedgecock Review, What he offered is tripartite formula for effective humanistic action under our conditions. Well, under conditions of this paradox. Triple formula is the informal, open cooperation. Informal means there are no rules of proceeding established beforehand. We enter the cooperation completely without setting any a priori conditions. The openness means that we are prepared to play at the same time the role of teachers and pupils. We are prepared to the eventuality that what we believe is true will be proved to be wrong in the course of cooperation. We are wishing to share our experience, our thoughts with others, but also to accept the lessons which are coming from their experience unknown to us before. So it is a mutuality which is the secret of the openness. And finally, cooperation rather than debate, discussion, and other things which are there, as we all know from our own practice, in order to prove ourselves victorious and to defeat the others who have different views. No, cooperation is something else. In principle, from the very start, it requires a lot of self-sacrifice to accept it. But nevertheless, we have to prepare ourselves in advance to the fact that at the end of cooperation, there will be no victors and no defeated. Everybody will emerge from the cooperation enriched, because in addition to one's own thoughts, one's own experience, one's own interpretation, he will or she will also receive the richness of other people's wisdom. Now, this is very generalistic formula, but I wonder whether under this very confused conditions, as Professor Donskis explained, incomprehensible world, whether we can afford anything more precise. It is just general advice how to proceed.
Yes, please.
Yes, very briefly, I would like to just to suspend another segment where I was about to react to Peter's very interesting talk. But in the meantime, I would like to respond to somehow to react to this segment of discussion. I wouldn't like to sound cynical. I guess that what our Spanish friend was explaining is a kind of anticipation of the future. It's a very important thing, and I do believe that it could happen that social movements are just an anticipation of new political segments or political parties. I believe that in many countries, political parties are in deep crisis. And I think without social cultural movements, they can simply die, pass away at any time. But again, this is a trap, because once a social movement becomes institutionalized, your narrative could be hijacked by someone else. You could simply be left with nothing, like King Lear, in this situation, but he's full. So, but at the same time, I deeply believe in this possibility to renew politics somehow, to refurbish, renovate politics with social movements, which seem to me a fundamental possibility to do something as well. Because political parties, they lose credibility in many countries. And the emergence of this political clownery, political buffoons, clowns, whether far right or far left, it's an indication, it's a clear indication that in many societies, this kind of bureaucratic expert politics is no longer plausible, is no longer convincing. And this spontaneity and this, it's something like, Seelengemeinschaft, it's the community of the souls, something that has been lost in modern politics. And social movements can bring this component and to strengthen it. But I would say that, again, we have an ambivalence. It may work quite well strengthening politics, giving very fresh and strong impetus, reviving many things. At the same time, you could be simply accommodated, integrated. Your narrative could be safely hijacked by someone else, because organizations and parties are quite skilled at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tak ja mám možno takú jednu poznámku, ktorá už nejak reflektovaná bola, a to je adekvátnosť inštitúcií, ktoré máme, politických inštitúcií dnes, a sveta, v ktorom žijeme. To znamená, že aj toto hnutie je príkladom spontánnej aktivity, ktorá vlastne nenašla možnosť realizovať svoje ciele vlastne iným spôsobom. Povedzme v tom kontexte národného štátu. Napadá ma mnoho iných príkladov, ako vlastne ten národný štát sa zmenil a ako sa mení. A samozrejme sú možno dve roviny, kde tá inovácia prichádza. Jedna je takáto, grassroots movements, každodenné nejaké pohyby, ktoré idú z iniciatív občanov a tak ďalej. A druhá je na tej globálnej rovine. To znamená, že obidve by sme mali nejak sledovať. Čo je podľa mňa nebezpečné, je, že aj s tými technológiami, si pamätám, že v 90. rokoch sme hovorili, že vlastne za pád komunizmu je čiastočne zodpovedná ako slobodná tlač a slobodné informácie a tak ďalej, že vlastne tá možnosť sledovať televíziu, počúvať, čo sa deje v slobodnejších krajinách a tak ďalej vlastne napomohla k pádu komunizmu. Ale zároveň sme postupne aj zistili, že tými slobodnými médiami sa zároveň šíria aj neveľmi tolerantné, neveľmi progresívne myšlenky. Dokonca zistujeme, že aj stredoeurópski fašisti sa dokážu cez internet dohodnúť a protestovať možno pod Krásnou Horkou alebo kde. To znamená, že je tam aj pozitívna stránka, teda aj negatívna. Ešte možno jedna poznámka, že v tej politickej rovine stále sa odvolávame na podstate inštitúcie, ktoré sú agrárneho rázu, ako je národný štát, národná lojalita, také tie emócie, ktoré máme, sú, ale vlastne infraštruktúrne žijeme, aj v každodennom živote žijeme v storočí 21. Takže veľa som toho neodhalil, ale podľa mňa aspoň smer som naznačil, že prečo, povedzme, je úspech týchto hnutí stále tu.
Contrast the Russian scene with the 15th scene, just to give some feedback to Aitor, because he has to leave. And we come back after the break and go on discussing.
How much time do I have?
How much
time do I have?
Does he have?
I feel
Someone.
I could. It reminds me of Who Should Live.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Can I start with something else, though? I'll get to Russia very quickly, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give me, when I have 2 minutes, hit me, and then I'll switch to Russia. So listen, I grew up in a very spoilt Western Europe and America, partly, and we suffered the tyranny of this word change. When we were 15, we took drugs, we started to go to parties, and most of our parents were 68ers, and they were like, this isn't change. We saw Jimi Hendrix, and we were in Chicago in '68. And then we got to university, and all our teachers were left-wing. And from the very first day, they were like, you must rise up against the Zionist, patriarchal, materialist, capitalist, troika machine. And we did. We went to these anti-globalization marches, and we were like, and we were doing what our professors told us to do. We weren't rebelling. We were actually following them. Sorry. And then a lot of us entered media, and a lot of us saw the Arab Spring, and it fitted into what our parents had told us and what our professors had told us. A lot of people on the street, masses equals good. Weirdly, we grew up in the West, and all our teachers were Marxists. So everybody ran to the Arab Spring going, lots of people in the street, it must be brilliant. And because we just suffer from this desire to maybe outdo our parents, but also change equals good. And it's got to the point now where sort of the politicians of my generation, we have in Britain a guy called Nick Clegg, who's a liberal politician, and all his announcements, I think he's been schooled by some NLP sort of people. It's like he says something, change, 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 and this neurosis of change. And then I came to Russia during the protests, and everyone was like, all my friends who'd covered the Arab Spring or were in Zuccotti Park were like, that's real change. In Russia, you don't know anything. And Russia is a country which, a little bit like me, is exhausted with the word change, and which has a very healthy skepticism towards anybody claiming to be the 99%, and which has a very healthy skepticism towards the word revolution because it created the worst one. It's empirical, the knowledge. And the first thing that one of the protest leaders, again, not very fuzzy concept of leadership there, said, this is not about revolution. Please, let's not use this word change. Let's just use this word revolution. And they started getting specific. I mean, that's kind of what I like about it. It's the country that gave us revolutions, that inspired people falsely towards revolutions, and which now seems to be growing out of it. I was in New York when Zuccotti Park was happening, and it made New York fun. It was great. There were drummers there. You could smoke weed right by Solomon Brothers. It was fantastic. The ideology of Zuccotti Park was in that phrase, we are the 99%. It's that joy of being we are the 99%. And as long as these people who say they're the 99%, as long as they're 1%, I think we're okay. If they are the 99%, I think we're in great, great danger. So weirdly enough, even though Russia is the worst society in the world, actually their protest movement is great because it's not saying revolution, it's not saying change. It's actually looking for specific 21st century ways to make life a little bit less awful. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you. So, thank you so much for being with us, and don't leave. We'll be back after the break. 10 minutes break, okay? No. So welcome back. We continue without Aitor because he had a flight to catch. But I hope that we will sometimes go back, which is not quite fair, but maybe we can sometimes go back to his experience and arguments so that he can be, so to say, present in his absence. And now I would like, I know, Peter, you think you don't have anything to say because everyone thinks they said everything, and now I prove him wrong, all of you. And I want to ask you what exactly these opposition movements achieve and how.
Well, why don't I just focus on Russia, because that's what I know. I know something. Yes. I know something about. So, on the one hand, it's achieved absolutely nothing. The situation's got worse. There are arrests happening. Putin's rule is more entrenched. The few liberals in government have left. So, on the one hand, you could say it's actually made things worse. Deep down, I of course don't believe that is the case. I think Aitor made a brilliant point that maybe people sniggered at about change of consciousness. I actually think it's incredibly important, and without that happening, nothing else can happen. So we've seen a distinct change of consciousness in Russia, and I can be quite specific about what. If during the whole of the 2000s, the Kremlin was generating the scripts, it was making up all the games that you could be playing, suddenly the Kremlin's on the back foot. They have to now react to what's been happening, and they're forced into a corner, and they've started to sort of create the sort of very weird version of monarchy, nationalism, autocracy. But this is a position they've been forced into by the protest movement, which is now starting to occupy bits of at least of the intellectual space. It's creating somewhere where it can develop some sort of stories. That's a huge change. That's an absolutely huge change. And obviously there's been a huge change in consciousness because the definitive marker of the last 10 years in Russia has been a sort of triumphant cynicism, almost like post-Soviet supermen who are free of any values, any ideology, and any, not even ideology or ideas, even free of meaning anything. Words had no meaning anymore. Words were just toys you could throw about while you stole money. Suddenly people are saying, no, words have meaning. You have to do what you say. So this is a huge shift. Though obviously that by itself is not enough. I mean, but I would not underestimate that. So that's the big thing. Actually, the biggest practical thing happened yesterday at around 4 o'clock. It didn't happen in Moscow. It started in Moscow. It happened in Washington. The Magnitsky Act was taken by Congress. Magnitsky was a corporate lawyer who discovered 230 million fraud inside the government, which we don't know who was involved yet, because at the moment the list of corrupt bureaucrats is secret. The Magnitsky list, which is a bill that's been pushed through by really very, very brave Russian and American lawyers. They've pushed it in Europe and now in Congress, and it will be a list that reveals the corrupt bureaucrats and will stop them getting visas to go to the West, and will stop their accounts. This is the Achilles heel of the Putin, what should we call it, clan, shabash, I don't know. Their Achilles heel is that for all their sort of patriotic posing, all their kids are in London and America, all their money is here, all their mistresses are here. Some of them a lot of them are in the Czech Republic. Karlovy is a Russian town. And this is their Achilles heel. And this is actually a very practical thing you can do. If you start saying, no, if you're corrupt, if you've stolen money, if you've killed people, you can't come here and you can't keep your money here, this is going to scare them. So it's a mix. I do think the consciousness stuff is incredibly important, but this kind of very, very specific thing is a very, very powerful and practical tool. And this is something that's been done against the Obama administration. There was a tweet this morning from Michael McFaul, the ambassador, the US ambassador in Moscow, saying, this isn't the way to do politics. We've got to deal with the Russians. So it's a very paradoxical situation where America is essentially supporting Putin. I mean, the reset is a policy that makes Putin's life easier. We have a Germany that is in thrall to Putin. It's a very odd situation. We have a Britain who kind of stands up and then gets scared again. We're British. Oh, we're scared. Money. We want that. But this is something that's been pushed through really just through sort of well-meaning congressmen and parliamentarians. So yeah, that's kind of thing. Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That raises another question, and maybe Leon, you could comment on that. If you think that there are these kind of like fuzzy, well-meaning, naive, or very localized opposition movements, and then there is this greater geographical framework like the EU or the United States, or what we can call the civilized world, if there is such a thing. Do you think pressures from there can help or be agents of change, or it's again another delusion, like you just mentioned, or Professor Bauman mentioned Hillary Clinton and the Twitter revolution in Iran, which proved to be an illusion?
It's a very strange situation, I have to say, that sometimes I find myself thinking that in the West, well, I know that many people dislike this concept, which is a Cold War concept, the West. But in fact, the West, keeping in mind Europe and the United States and Canada, many forces and people generated numerous tensions in the West. But at the same time, these people played a very positive role in Eastern Europe or some other dictatorial societies. For instance, George Sörös, this is something that I would describe as a highly paradoxical and highly ambivalent case. On the one side, George Sörös is a person, as you know, whose hedge funds and speculations nearly ruined Malaysian economy. And I think that very few people have, some sentiments due to hedge funds and his activities. Well, as a philanthropist, as someone who set up the network of open society funds in Central Europe, so he was a hero. He helped my country tremendously, enormously, and Soros was a hero. And this is something very ambivalent. A left-wing billionaire, someone who is a left-winger and a billionaire, who is absolutely ruthless and savage when it comes to capitalist structure, but who has a very, very important left-wing sensitivities concerning human rights. This is something that I think is unprecedented in history. Very far from this Manichaean distinction between the left and the right, we have a situation when we have left-wing billionaires, we have people who have left-wing sensibilities and sensitivities, and whose role in human rights protection and human rights affairs is enormous. At the same time, these people could be absolutely without sentiment and not sentimental people when it comes to, to economy, to real economy structure. For instance, we know that Soros not only created the Open Society Fund network, for which Central and Eastern Europe will always grateful to him, but there is another thing. It's Arya Nair, his friend, Arya Nair, a human rights defender, who set up the Helsinki Watch, which was to become the Human Rights Watch. And there is a joke in the United States that there is only one US citizen who has his own foreign policy. That's George Sörös. And he has his Secretary of the State, who is Arya Nair, who set up the Human Rights Watch. And curiously enough, the Human Rights Watch was a huge success story, in fact. So when you see the role of Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International for China, Russia, Eastern Europe, in terms of human rights, that is something that calls for celebration. But at the same time, they generated their tensions within the West, within Europe. Again, it's a very ambivalent story. But when we come to Russia and China, this is something different. We have to remember one more thing. We talk about the Arab Spring, and with very good reason, quite rightly so. We talk about indignados, that's wonderful again, but we tend to forget about some other forms of protest. For instance, more than 50 people in Tibet burned themselves alive. 50 cases of self-immolation, even more. Well, I think this is quite telling in a country which knows Jan Palach, or my country, which knows Roma Scalanta, young people, and their self-immolations in the 60s and 70s, more than 50 people. And only then we start working very, very hard in the European Parliament on human rights in Tibet and China. And the problem is that this is something very ambivalent. On the one side, BRIC, the emerging economies. And let me put it quite simple. Economic performance or successful economic performance becomes a license to be described as transitional democracy or a very specific case or a complex case. I have to say that this ambivalence allows to create a very ugly alternative scenario, capitalism without liberty, which is what China and Russia are all about. That's crony capitalism without political liberty. That's capitalist structure with no West European and Western sensitivities. And what is interesting is that Russia and China are very far from countries like Uganda that hangs homosexual people. No, these are very modern states, very modern, very advanced, with absolutely magnificent cultural traditions and everything. And yet these states fundamentally deny the whole concept of human rights. That's why we are at the crossroads. And we have to make up our minds. We have to decide which side we're standing on. And this situation doesn't allow any confusion. We have to voice our opinions because much is at stake. And this brings me to my point concerning what Peter very, very aptly and I think almost, artistically described concerning this simulacrum, political simulacrum in Russia. Yes, it's a challenge. Vladislav Surkov, I think he coined the term sovereign democracy.
Yes, that's a lovely one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely. Sovereign
what does
democracy.
that mean?
Look, this is something very curious because in Russia you have the situation when the words are separated from their meanings. Liberal Democrats, that's the party of Vladimir Zhirinovsky. And there is a story. He went to Germany and he participated in one conference, and German colleagues were observing him, and then they described him in the following way. After 5 minutes, we understood that he is not a liberal. After 10 minutes, it was obvious that he is not a Democrat. After 15 minutes, it was obvious that he is a fascist. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have this divorce of words and meanings. This is a total divorce, and this kind of masquerade is no joke in Russia. Russia is doing fine in many ways. This is a regime which is very difficult to detect, to expose, and to discredit. And I think that at this point, the Soviet Union had many important factors. Dissidents, the immortal, unforgettable Russian dissidents, the Russian dissent. And let me tell you something. It's a delusion of the West to think that human rights represent something specifically Western. No. Without Chinese and Russian courage, without the courage of Chinese and Russian dissidents, without Ukrainian dissidents, it would never, ever have been possible. Human rights represent, as Michael Ignatieff put it very, very aptly, I guess, they represent Western organization and efficiency on the one side, and East European and Chinese courage. That's why even in the European Parliament we have the supreme award for the fight for human rights, the Sakharov Award. I'm just afraid that sometimes we betray Sakharov by choosing, quite interesting cases, to say the least. But I have to say that, in fact, it would be very naive to describe human rights as something characteristically Western, whereas describing Russia and China as something that have nothing to do with that. The paradox is, and this is the final point that I would like to make, the paradox is that human rights would have been unthinkable without people like those who created Helsinki groups in Moscow and Leningrad, without Sakharov, without Sinyavsky, without Bukovsky, Yelena Bonner, Grigory Pomerantsev. This would have been impossible. But at the same time, the state denies the concept of human rights, and much the same happens to China. Ai Weiwei is one parallel reality, and the Chinese Communist Party represents another, and a very remote reality. Yeah.
Thank you.
Should I speak?
Yes, please.
Wow. After these two brilliant speeches, I am speechless, really. I don't dare to open my mouth. And even more for the reason that I intend to pour a little bit of colder water on the enthusiasm. Martin Luther King is famous for saying, I had a dream. I must start from admitting that I have a suspicion rather than a dream. And the suspicion is the following one. Soviet Union was not destroyed by dissent. It was destroyed by elite losing faith in their own political formula. Soviet Union as a federation of Soviet states was destroyed, dismantled, not by rebellion on periphery, but by people in Moscow being fed up with just the burden of administering faraway countries, very different in very many respects from the center. Now, that's unfortunately, there is something in it. I think that the Russian experience to which Mr. Pomerantsev referred is not just specifically a Russian phenomenon. I think if we are waiting for something, we are waiting probably here in the West for Gorbachev Mark II, someone who will surrender elite, who will throw the towel in the ring and say, well, we are acting on false presumptions, our concept doesn't work, and we have to do something else. Whether Gorbachev number 2 will come, but whether he is born already, perhaps he is waiting somewhere where you are sitting here and discussing, perhaps we failed to notice him so far. as Gorbachev was dismissed in his future role for quite a long time in the West. Well, but I would like to share with you the second suspicion, namely that dissent in the West is handicapped by coming in the wrong time. Again, I was inspired by what Mr. Pomerantsev said about different atmosphere in Chicago. Everybody wanted change, and then he came to Russia, and everybody dreamed about some degree of tranquility, quietness, and just having been fed up with changes. Now, there is Sigmund Freud, who long ago told us that all civilization of any kind is a trade-off, is a sort of an exchange transaction between two values which are equally indispensable for decent, gratifying human life. One is security, the other is freedom. He wrote that in 1929, and he rightly assumed in his time that all the psychological troubles, all sufferings of contemporary men and women come from the fact that we, people at that time, surrendered too much of their freedom for the sake of more security. And, I suspect, again, terribly sorry, I am suspecting so much things in one short speech, but I suspect again that if Sigmund Freud was sitting with us here in the panel, he would repeat his first statement that civilization is a trade-off, that the two values of of security and freedom are equally indispensable, but damn difficult to reconcile, because if you have more security, you can have it only at the expense of some of your freedom, and if you want more freedom, you have to, you can receive it only at the expense of some of your security. So it's a Hass-Liebe relationship between the two. But his diagnosis would be exactly the opposite. He would say that most of the psychological unease, tension, anxiety, nightmares, and so on of contemporary men and women comes from surrendering too much security for unprecedented gain in freedom. Yes, we do we enjoy the unprecedented gain of freedom unknown in preceding history. We have absolute freedom in experimenting, selecting, choosing our own identity, changing identity, and so on, something which our ancestors could not dream of. But, and that's a very big but, as I repeat, freedom comes together with risk, with uncertainty. You can't have freedom without risk and without uncertainty. And living in uncertainty and living aware that whatever you do is risky is a very unpleasant situation. And it may result in what I would call freedom fatigue. Freedom fatigue. Too much of that. You are realizing that you are constantly taken by surprise, unprepared, unbraced for what is going to happen to you, and that when facing to that, you find yourself, A, ignorant, you don't know how to calculate the future, B, impotent, you are aware that even if you knew how to handle the future, you are too powerless to actually do something about it. And because you are at the same time feeling ignorant and impotent, there is a third outcome as well, which is feeling humiliated, inadequate, which is very undignified feeling and very offensive to your feeling of human dignity. Now, dissent this descent, which we are discussing today, came to the world, descended from heaven or rose from the grassroots, whatever you prefer, in a very unfortunate moment. Studying the dialectics between security and freedom, I came some time ago to the conclusion that when I was young, I wrote the book about history as the history of freedom, from less freedom to more freedom to more freedom to more freedom. That was one of the aspects of the idea of unilinear progress. We are moving constantly ever closer to some ideal state of society. I came to the conclusion that progress, historical progress, is not unilinear after all, but pendulum-like. And if you look back at historical upheavals, you will see that the closer people came to absolute freedom, and absolute freedom would mean absolute chaos, the more they developed nostalgia for security, and vice versa. The closer they came to security, to absolute security, and absolutely security means serfdom, slavery, the more they longed for freedom, more freedom. And my last suspicion is that at this moment of history, not only Russians, but most of the Western world is at the turn of the pendulum. I think I look around and I see how many people are actually ready today to surrender their hard-won, not by them, by their ancestors, by their fathers, grandfathers, liberty. Surrender quite a good deal of this liberty for the sake of more tranquility, more stability, less surprises, less risks, and so on. Now, if this is the case, then the situation really, our situation is so complex. And I think that the populist right-wing parties, all sorts of Zhirinovskis and so on, are just capitalizing on this turn of the screw, or rather turn of the pendulum. They feel the grassroots. And that's why they hide under the shelter of restoration slogans. They promise return to the old, quiet, stabilized times when everybody was in his or her own place, rightly belonging to him, and did not dream and he did not have to risk jumping from that place to any other.
Thank you. It just occurred to me that what you said rhymes surprisingly well with what we heard from Aitor, that such collective action, even if we don't see tangible results, or even if we find it rather naive, gives dignity and feeling of belonging to people who are not yet ready to completely surrender in face of institutions. So can that be a motivating force behind?
The general principle I want to mention only is that I don't believe that unfulfillability of the task is an argument against trying to fulfill it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Juraj.
Takže mám hovoriť viac do mikrofónu. Ja som začal takou poláňovskou perspektívou, tak možno by som ju mal ďalej prihrievať. A nadväzujúc vlastne na dvoch predrečníkov, tiež by som chcel možno podať takú inú perspektívu na tú dialektiku, na ten dualizmus, ktorý sme mali, ten paradox napríklad. Sorošov paradox, to sa mi páči, že by to mohlo byť. Že ako je to vlastne možné, že niekto je ľavicový liberál a zároveň je teda bezškrupulózny bankár alebo investor. A vlastne tá odpoveď je práve už aj v tom...
Robin Hood was the first.
Robin Hood tiež, no. A odpoveď je asi v tom, čo zase z tej mojej perspektívy by som nazval ako dialektika komunity a trhu. Možno tie sociálne hnutia, nie možno, určite sú nejakou variáciou na obranu komunity, v ktorej ľudia žijú. To znamená nejakých každodenných vzťahov, väzieb, sociálnych sietí, ktoré sú narušené niečím zvonku. A práve tá poľaňovská perspektíva hovorí, že moderná spoločnosť priniesla to disembedding society, teda, že sa oddelili sa sféry, možno ekonomická a spoločenská. Niekedy dokonca až tak ďaleko, že povedzme je možné, že pán Sörös nevidí problém v tom, že kombinuje svoj ľavicový liberalizmus s tým obchodovaním. Čo som tým chcel povedať? Že vlastne ten trh napríklad v tomto prípade umožňuje rozhodnutia oslobodené od sociálneho kontextu a od vzťahov, konkrétnych vzťahov. Jednoducho je neosobný. Už teda môžeme ísť aj naspodok k nám, niekde do supermarketu, ako naše rozhodovanie o kúpe jogurtu nepodlieha nejakému komplikovanému uvažovaniu, za akých podmienok bol ten jogurt vyrobený, či pri našom značkovom tričku bola zneužívaná detská práca a podobne a podobne. Čiže takto nejako vlastne ten kapitalizmus funguje, čo nie je len zlé, to je aj vlastne pozitívna vec, umožňuje nejakú kumuláciu a nejaké rozhodovanie. To znamená neosobné rozhodovanie. To znamená, že podľa mňa, aj o tom sú tie hnutia, ak chceme vlastne zmeniť tú spoločnosť, čo teda tie hnutia chcú, tak vlastne potrebujeme zmeniť to uvažovanie o tej spoločnosti najprv. A nie tú ekonomiku, ako sme si doteraz mysleli. Asi tak.
We are almost coming to some very nice conclusions. I don't know if you can find them, but I can. But I leave it to the audience to figure it out. I have one more question, then I would like to open the floor, if that's okay with you. Is that okay? Okay. Just now, I promised that we would come back to the technology part, but I would kind of like broaden it a little bit and ask your opinion on media coverage, on the role of media coverage and media in general in the last 5 years in the interpretation of social movements and protests. What do you think it did to these protests? Is it presented as entertainment or...
Yes, a couple of days ago I spoke about this new tendency towards the merger of political clownery or political theater and politics, and I have to say that in fact the dividing line between a political entertainer and politician is becoming very thin. And in fact, we have many indications that the rise of new technologies very richly assisted politicians simply to change their roles, to change their skin. And I have to say that it's a very ambivalent tendency. On the one side, it's an incredible increase of the potential to react, exchange opinions. At the same time, I have to say that it exposed total confusion within the world of politics. And I believe that what happened was that it's becoming increasingly obvious that technology outpaced politics. And I would say even more, that politics is becoming a chambermaid of technology. In many ways, not technology serves politics, but the other way around. Politics serves technology. And I mean not only Facebook or Twitter or this kind of political communication where politicians are becoming hostages, participating in the game whose name they don't know yet. They participate in the game whose rules are totally totally nebulous for them. But yet they have to follow, because that's the name of the game. You have to participate, otherwise it's impossible to win the election. It's impossible to reach out. It's impossible to reach the electorate. Yet they don't know what they are doing, but they participate there. At the same time, I have to say that there is something that I would describe as a metaphysics of technology. To remember Immanuel Kant and to paraphrase Kant, it would be that you can, therefore you ought. If you can use these technologies to expose someone, to spy on something, to increase mass surveillance, you ought to do it. And what happens is that I'm simply repeating a very well-known thread in Zygmunt Bauman's books concerning technology as a possibility of social exclusion. For instance, if you happen to be a senior person, if you are in your 80s, and if you don't feel very much at home in technology, and if you are a latecomer to Facebook, to the world of Twitter and Facebook, if you deny it, remaining loyal, keeping your fidelity to the world of books and music, you are at risk of excluding yourself from your classmate community. You are unable to reach out to your friends, to your classmates. This is the way to social exclusion. Nobody asks your opinion. Nobody asks whether you prefer to pay your taxes via internet or whether you would like to stay in the queue and to pay it, using traditional ways. Technology would push you to the limit of making up your mind, and whether you like it or not, you have to do it. You can, therefore you ought. That's a total confusion of oughts and cans. This is to say that free will or the liberty of your choice disappears. Technology doesn't tolerate any second thoughts. You have to follow it. And I'm just afraid that what happened to politics was a total confusion when we think in a very naive way, almost childishly, naively, that we are in control of the situation. No. No, we don't know what is happening. We don't realize. And that's why having lost many important things in politics, we try to stick with these new things as if to say that we believe in digital freedom, we believe in Facebook as a great chance for democracy, and I totally agree with Professor Bauman that it's a possibility, but it's not a warranty. Nobody promised you that. How could you be certain that the internet alone can absolve you? That it can be, no, it could be very naive. And that's why I have to say that when technology comes to replace values and ideas or the sense of direction, that's the worst case scenario in politics. I'm just afraid that this is happening. Or for instance, the idea that if you love your country, this is how this reasoning goes for someone who is a State Security Department employee. You have to use technologies to expose enemies of the state, with all kinds of paranoid, implications. The enemies from within and from without. Yes, everything is okay, but it's a great temptation. What is the democratic mechanism to send the message that you cannot spy on a citizen in such a light manner? You can do your utmost to screen or, to analyze someone who is your fellow State Security Department employee, or someone who is a colonel in the army. But how can you use this to your ordinary citizens? How to protect their freedom, how to protect their privacy. And I'm just afraid that what technology did was it killed privacy before our eyes. Not only those reality shows in our self-revealing age, which calls for attention-seeking. There was a time when George Orwell described Big Brother and the TV screen as a symbol of totalitarianism. Now look, TV screen is not a threat. It's a great dream. It's a desire. We want to be filmed. We want to be on camera. We want to expose ourselves with our life stories. Meaning that Big Brother, I was really thrilled to reveal that a big reality show bore the same name of Big Brother. So George Orwell, that was the sort of, posthumous smile, posthumous grimace of 1984. But in any case, this is something really telling. Privacy is dead, as simple as that. You cannot keep your privacy in this technological world. You would be exposed sooner or later. And that's why it's a question of whether you decide to surrender yourself or whether you think that it's a proper moment to think for a while, just awaiting the moment when you would be exposed. by the state or by someone else. I'm just afraid that this is a profound crisis of the public and the private. It's a profound crisis, and I'm afraid that this happened precisely because we failed to understand the implications, the ethical implications of technology. And I'm just afraid that it killed privacy right before our eyes. And I have to say that if there is no clear distinction between the private and the public, how can we fulfill civilized politics? How can we fulfill this? Politics in a civilized manner means that I am able to internalize political tensions or dramas of my society, making them into my private concerns. And on the other side, some private concerns of citizens have every chance to become a public concern. This is how this dialectic works. And all of a sudden, we have, and again, to quote Professor Bauman, we live in a world where public life is made up by private stories of celebrities. If you are a victim or a celebrity, you have a chance to be heard. If you are not, another question is it possible to remain an intellectual in the manner, for instance, the Group 47 in Germany was able to perform their duties? I'm just thinking about people like Heinrich Böll, Günter Grass, or other great European writers and intellectuals. They were the embodiment of the conscience. Right away, if you don't have access to TV or the internet, if you cannot expose your thrilling and exciting life story, who on earth are you? What are you doing in politics? So this is a very serious question, and I'm not joking. I deeply believe that this is a very important ethical concern, which was ignored for a long time, yet it tends to resurface over and over again, and we are not likely to escape from it.
I just want to insert a remark in memory of Aitor and also on my own behalf that exposure can be a strategic exposure in the sense that you expose yourself because you want to achieve some kind of visibility for your aims. So that's what internet organizers do. They expose themselves, bring some danger, and that they take some risks in order to be able to reach a media channel. But I really don't want to interfere with this. I would love to hear what Professor Bauman has to say.
Yeah, before Professor Bauman, if you kindly allow me just 1 second, I would respond by saying I agree with you, absolutely. This is not to say that I'm cynical about this. It's a situation where you have to decide. Although I would be very happy to remain as private and independent as, for instance, people were in the 17th century. But this is no longer possible. That's why you have to decide. You have to be there. Otherwise, this vacuum would be filled with someone or something quite unpleasant. So you have to be there for the sake of humanity. But I have to say that, you know, there is an English saying that there was a happy time when every lady or gentleman was expected to be mentioned in the press 3 times. After the fact of birth, so then after the fact of marriage, and thirdly after the fact of death. So now 3 times in the public would be a total failure for a public figure. Yeah.
Well, Professor Donskis left me behind. He agreed with you before I managed to do it. My first response to what you said was to agree, and you have again pointed out a very important issue. Professor Donskis mentioned Orwell and Big Brother. I would mention Foucault and Panopticon. Surveillance, according to Foucault, elaborating on Jeremy Bentham's invention, was panoptical in nature. The power in modern society was panoptical in nature, division of people into surveyors and surveyed. If before modern era people used simply their eyes, and with using eyes, all the equipment, all the technology, we are all in the equal position. We just, watch each other. I watch you, you watch me, and so on. But then came Jeremy Bentham, invented the way, an architectural structure in which surveyed won't see the surveillance. And therefore, they will be obliged to behave all their life as if they were watched at the moment. Very economical way of conducting power. But then came Thomas Mathiesen in our times already and suggested the issue of synopticon instead of panopticon. And panopticon means that surveyors surveyed, while the panopticon is synopticon is the other way around. The surveyed the surveyors. We are watching greedily at the spectacle of celebrities who are our idols and take the inkling of them how to live, how to be happy, what is how far your pranks can move without being caught and without being condemned and things like that. The many are watching the few. Not the few are watching the many, but the many are watching the few. Then Didier Bigot, quite recently, pointed out that the third thing, banopticon, not panopticon, but banopticon, B instead of P. Ban in English is prohibition. Now, if surveillance served in its original form, in the form of panopticon, the task of keeping people in their place and not allow them to bodily or spiritually deviate from this place. Today it is the surveillance, centralized surveillance is used only to keep unwanted people away, to exclude them, not to allow them to go in. What does it mean in? In is the area in which the modern power can apply, instead of enforcement, much more economical, much more gentle, and much more convenient ways of ruling, namely temptation and seduction. And panopticon serves simply to exclude those people who are immune to temptation. For example, they don't have credit cards, so therefore they can't be dutiful consumers. Now to remove them from where the decent people come and congregate and live, exposed to the very efficient pressure of constant temptation and seduction. Panopticon is complemented by panopticon because those who are excluded by panopticon are then subjected to the prison regime guided by panopticon. But now I come to this, what Professor Donskis was speaking about, and you picked up as well, and very, very importantly, the question of privacy, sorry, the last suspicion I will share with you. My suspicion is that our servitude today, our surveillance is DIY, do it yourself, right? Partly because of the pressure of the example set by mass media, the idea that I am seen, therefore I am. That's the modern version of Descartes, as you know. Now, because of that, people are rushing. Every Facebook member wakes up in the morning and rushes to the internet to confide what used to be, once upon a time, the most intimate secrets, which you confided in only in confessional, when you converse directly with God or with your most closest friends. Now we do it on our own will. It is what Etienne La Boétie named several centuries ago voluntary servitude, DIY servitude. And I suggest to you that one of the impact of internet is that if someone wants to exercise secret, treacherous, and very cruel, merciless power over you, he or she would have at the disposal much more data about you than all KGBs, Stasis, CIAs ever dreamt of collecting. They don't need agents, they don't need spies. They can rely on our own will to expose ourselves. Why do we expose ourselves? Because that is the only hope which most of us have. It is, I would say, Facebook is a poor man replacement of the boutiques of celebrities. We are not celebrities, so we can only hope that someone, some very influential person will go by, will notice our blogs, right, and find something entertaining in it, and therefore we will be promoted into the position of celebrity. That is a trap. That's a very, very, I would say, I don't know, I'm not sure whether it's an ambush or a trap, but something out of both, which is also the impact of mass media. Apart from, I admit, there are very many merits and contributions to convenience and comfort of life. They have also this sort of an impact.
Yeah, I don't have much to add about the internet, simply because I think that the topic has been covered as such, which has brilliance and depth. Let me just add one little note about reality shows and about exposing oneself, because I am Big Brother. In my long career in media, I have actually done a lot of entertainment shows as well, and one of the things I did was make entertainment programs in Russia and Britain and in America. Simply one can't just do current affairs nowadays, one has to do entertainment as well. And it's a very interesting thing. There is a very strong case to make that we live in this age of I am seen, therefore I am. That's clearly, it's clearly an ideology. You have this phenomenon of the celebrity who is a celebrity for being a celebrity, which is a bizarre state of affairs. But actually, just a perspective from the everyday business of television and making entertainment programs, there is approximately 10% of people who want to expose themselves. I've been working in documentaries and entertainment for many years. It hasn't increased. What the kind of Big Brother shows give, they were that percentage of people who always want to expose themselves. It's a psychological thing they have. Plus actors who couldn't make it as actors. So I'm not sure how huge this growth of exposing yourself. On Facebook, I see again, 10% of people who want to expose themselves, and the rest are using it.
There is 1 billion of daily users of Facebook.
And it's used in different ways. It's used in completely different ways. Some use it to expose themselves, people you wouldn't expect. High-level academics turn out to be perfect celebrity Big Brother fodder. I couldn't believe it. I mean, professors I knew and academics were talking about their pants and ridiculous. But they haven't increased. Most people use Facebook, I'm just talking on a daily basis that I see, quite cleverly. They invent avatars. They use it for PR, contact, building political coalitions. I'm sure there is an increase in this kind of exposing yourself, but I don't think it's as huge as we think. Certainly in television, working every day, it was always a struggle to find people to fill up these reality shows. They weren't queuing around the block. It was always the same amount of people and a very specific psychological type, which has been in society right from the start. So it's a perspective from the ground that I see every day. Just to return to the other theme that you asked about, how have the protests been covered? Again, I work in television, so all I can talk about, all I can give is examples of what I see around me every day. A lot of my friends were covering the Arab Spring, and I mentioned this briefly. I think there are a number of narratives which feed into this kind of logic that's appeared in journalists' head and TV producers' heads that lots of people on the street equals good. Automatically, without really any discrepancy. It could be a wonderful thing like 1989 in Prague or here. It could be a terrible thing. It could be 1917 Russia. We don't know, but there's been this formula, partly because we are still locked in a very Marxist education that revolution equals progress, partly because of the seduction of the television shot. As a television producer, there is nothing better than the big, wide shot of lots of people on the street. So, it doesn't matter what they're saying. They could be saying, kill all the women, or put in prison all the bankers, or all lawyers should be killed. It doesn't matter. There are lots of people on the street. It looks great. It's brilliant. So that's I think, a big thing for us as TV producers. We're seduced by this, the big crowd shot. And I think that's reflected in the way the protests have been covered. That they were treated as one thing. They weren't treated discriminately. They weren't researched. We were just seduced by the beauty of the masses. I mean, it's funny. Nobody reads Ortega y Gasset I had to discover it myself. that crowds are a bad thing, or something I had to discover for myself. It's weird. There's this educational line has been lost somewhere, which is a tragedy. So that's what I'd say about how the protests have been covered.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ja mám také stále témy dnes. Tak mňa napadá pri Facebooku. Ja som závislý na Facebooku a bojujem s tým občas. Chcel som iba pripomenúť, že podobne ako kolega Pomerantsev, jednoducho má to aj tie úžasné niečo nové, technologické, má aj takú starú tvár a že vlastne pre mňa ten Facebook je úplne obyčajná, normálna komunita, kde tých ľudí poznám a komunikujem s nimi. A je to nejaká moja vnútorná potreba. Myslím si, že to, čo poznáme ako striktné delenie súkromný, verejný a jedna nikdy tak úplne 100% nefungovalo a dva fungovalo len v niektorých častiach sveta. Všetky kultúrne formy, ktoré poznáme historicky, boli nejakými formami komunity, to znamená, že aj ten Facebook je len nejaká forma komunity alebo iné sociálne siete. Čiže v tomto možno sú tie pozitívne stránky a ľudia chcú zdieľať, ľudia sa chcú deliť a ja si nepamätám, že by niekto z mojich priateľov teda spomínal tie trenírky, ale som trošku prekvapený, že koľko ľudí stráca zábrany vyjadrovať netolerantnejšie názory alebo vyjadrovať sa o mnoho radikálnejšie, ako keby sa tam strácala tá zodpovednosť za to, čo povieme. Ale opäť poviem, zase to nie je veľmi odlišné od toho, ako keď sme s priateľmi, kde spontánne povieme niekedy aj hlúposť alebo nejakú vec, ktorá je možno ostrejšia ako na debate, ako je táto. Čiže to je prvá poznámka, ktorú by som chcel predostrieť. A druhá je, že keď hovoríme o technológiách, o médiách, tak mám pocit, že zabudáme zase na to, čo tiež od začiatku sa tu bavíme, že tu je ekonomika a tá tiež sa zmenila pod vplyvom. Dnes o kríze, keď sa uvažuje, tak sa hovorí, ako vlastne internet a tí chlapci v sákach za tými počítačmi vlastne vedia klikaním v podstate priviesť k bankrotu štát nejaký niekde na svete. Čiže aj takúto dimenziu to má. A druhá dimenzia je tá o informáciách. Akože internet, kto ich má, dokonca dnes sa javí v svetle krízy viditeľnejšie, že nie je dôležité nejaké formálne vlastníctvo, ale ovládanie toho vlastníctva. To znamená, že chief executive officers majú reálne väčšiu moc ako majiteľi akcií. Asi tak by som to povedal. To znamená, že kto má informácie, ovláda druhých a to myslím si, že naši páni profesori tu vedľa mňa vlastne zodpovedali dostatočne. Takže akože musíme sa toho bať.
Thank you. We still have some minutes left before I read you a long proclamation. So please, anyone with questions? To any of the panelists on any of the subjects that we touched upon? All right, not questions, objections. We are quite open. No one? Yeah? Shall I come with the proclamation? Okay.
Good evening. Hello. I just would like to point the fact about, well, I listen speaking about internet, about security, about change, which is the title of today's panel. Just a few weeks ago, I had the chance to do a question to the deputy president of Google. who is responsible for this area and Central Europe, Africa, and Middle East. And I asked him a question about ethics of Google, ethics in general of the search engines in internet. And in that moment, it was just a few minutes before, he spoke about the new Google glasses, which will, as you know, they will propose to us the research, the searches on glasses directly. We don't need any more a telephone, a smartphone, or a computer. We can see everything on the glass. And when I was doing to him the question, he told me that in the meantime, listening my question, he would already see 3 answers which Google glasses will propose to him. So I am thinking about this. When we search something on internet, let's say Google, because this is the new big brother of this era, when we write just 3 letters, we already have a list of possible research which are maybe also not in our mind yet, but they propose to us 15 possible searches, and then millions of results. So are we going to stupidity? This was for the panel of yesterday, stupidity. Are we going toward the stupidity of the people? I mean, we normal people, are we going to think less and less because tomorrow somebody will think instead of us? Google or the others will propose us what to think and they will give us already the answer. Is this not a big threat about security, about privacy, about freedom of thinking, not only freedom of internet? And Google, as well as the other motor engines, they are having also many ethics questions when they block many results, for example in China, for example in some countries which are asking them to close the freedom to some specific themes. So can we avoid this kind of threat for the future? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think that I would sound sensational here. It's a very profound question, of course, and I would only could suggest that, of course, it would be very dangerous and naive of us to rely on technocratic responses to technocratic dangers, for instance. I think that what is very important, again, to remember the crucial importance of liberal arts education, of critical thinking, critical thought, and of course to allow people to resist the temptation to speak within the framework of some vocabularies or catchwords or catchphrases that are provided, premeditated, as if it were, the only possibility for us to function and act. So we shouldn't allow this happen, because if things develop in such a way that we come straight into the world or to the space where there are some vocabularies awaiting us, some vocabulary, some frames of meaning, and everything is beyond our choice, beyond our possibility to rephrase, rework, then it would be a great danger. I'm just afraid that it's a matrix. It could be a new matrix. But at the same time, I believe that there were many dilemmas in human history like this when humanity was confronted by this danger and this possibility. And I think that what is crucially important is never allow this to happen, that an independent and self-respecting human individual relies on anonymous forces, on anonymous forces that should resolve his or her problems. And I believe that what is very important, just to regain this Renaissance feeling on which I would rely very much, to believe in the validity, in the unique validity of a human individuality, and not in anonymous forces or institutions. And don't think that institutions or anonymous forces are more rational than human individuals with their imperfections, mistakes, spontaneity. It's a very important thing. We tend to forget about it. And sometimes we think that human fragility and vulnerability comes from our unpredictability and some other things. But I would dare remembering a very important feeling which was nurtured and widespread by Renaissance humanists, that friendship, human sociability, and the reliance of human intimacy, the power of human sociability, on powers of association, these things are crucial. Otherwise, this vertical logic of power would work in such a way that we would be created or we would be transformed into clients, and they would be our experts. There would be two classes, experts and clients, and this would be the worst kind of caricature of democracy.
Let me just tell a very, very quick story about, I've been researching this guy, Yuri Milner. Have you heard of him? He's this Russian, he's a bit like Sörös. He's a multi-millionaire investor in Facebook, intellectual, and he's very beautifully and very powerfully goes around the world setting up this nightmare vision that Renaissance man, he says it in his word, is over, discrete personality is over, individuality is over, we will live in a sort of nebulous, fragmented, Googleized pseudo-existence. And what can I say? I tried to meet, I met with him briefly over the phone, and then I tried to meet him to do a bigger story because he had this very powerful apocalyptic vision, and people were really buying into it, and they were very, very scared. And then at one point I realized that he was doing Facebook IPO at this time, he was doing Zynga IPO, he'd invested in that vision. And something went, oh my God, he's doing the oldest trick in the book, sell apocalyptic vision, sell your other thing. There is a case to be made, there is something going on, but I think we're so subdued by apocalypse and by the end of man, it's right up there with big crowds as a favorite kind of story to sell people. And I think a lot of the, I'm not a cynic and I don't see market forces everywhere, but I do think a lot of this sort of humanity is about to be changed by internet happens at exactly the same time that Facebook is having an IPO. It's just like, oh, okay, let's talk about this story a lot. There's a real, there's a lot of internet shares to sell at the moment, and one of the best ways to sell. It didn't. No, exactly. After which Milner disappeared and wouldn't let me interview him. I think there's also a lot of noise around the internet because it's a real kind of like it's something to sell at the moment. It's a great story to sell, and there are real shares to sell. So why not? You know, this dystopic vision is quite marketable. Marshall McLuhan in the 1950s and 60s talked about how television would make us. We wouldn't write novels anymore. We would be non-verbal. We would go tribal again because television would change the central nervous system. It was complete bollocks, but everyone fell for it for a while. I think we'll be writing novels for a bit more, and I think we'll see a return to long-form writing quite soon. I think there'll be a rollback. I'm bored of Twitter already. I've had it for a year, and I want a book. It's boring already. I think we've already seen the end. We're coming to the end of the wave, and yeah, don't worry, we're going to be here.
Well, I think there's an interesting.
Yeah.
There's an interesting contradiction in what you said because you are afraid of powerful political or economic interests being able to filter and control Google. And on the other hand, you're also afraid that Google might just suggest us whatever. I mean, it's based on the human principle of imitation. What is good enough for 1,000 people, that would probably pass, and I will be happy. It's a very simple algorithm. It's not a simple algorithm, but it's a very simple technical solution to the problem of relevance. And I do think that the professors had this very convincing answer. I am always online. I am the one who's always online. I am on Facebook. I am not on Twitter because I hate that. But I check my email every 5 minutes and so on. And I may and may not have lost my brain already, but I tend to think that these are just tools. And just as Leonid said, if you use the tools, you must know what you're using, and it's all about liberal arts education.
One thing has changed, and this is a story that I've wanted to do in many ways. Sorry, I'll just add, one thing has changed. The life of the person who's constantly having affairs, the loverlass. No, I know, I have guys who I know who live, they're very strange, and they live for affairs, and they can't be on Facebook. You cannot have serial affairs, yeah. You cannot be a serial cheater, whether a man or a woman, and have an existence on Facebook. You will be caught very, very fast. A lot of them aren't on Facebook, which means that girls think they're creepy, because if you're not on Facebook, you're kind of weird. So it's a real crisis for them. There is a story to tell about the people who have serial affairs, and it's a tragedy for them. Whether that's a bad thing, that's a different question.
Thank you, Peter.
It's true. It's a tragedy.
So, thank you for your attention, and thank you for your invaluable contributions. And let me just read this message from the organizers. Aside from the Central European Forum 2010 panel discussions, which today will resume with another panel at 8:30, the organizers would like to invite you to a movie screening of an excellent award-winning documentary, Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry, winner of the Special Jury Prize of the Sundance Film Festival and many others. Ai Weiwei is China's most famous international artist and its most outspoken domestic critic. Against the backdrop of strict censorship and an unresponsive legal system, Ai expresses himself and organizes people through art and social media. Oops. In response, Chinese authorities have shut down his blog, beat him up, bulldozed his newly built studio, and held him in secret detention. Ai Weiwei, Never Sorry is the inside story of a dissident for the digital age who inspires global audiences and blurs the boundaries of art and politics. First-time director Alison Kleiman gained unprecedented access to Ai while working as a journalist in China. Her detailed portrait provides a nuanced exploration of contemporary China and one of its most compelling public figures. The movie will be screened tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning in Cinema Mladost. Help me with this. Okay, got it? Okay, Hvidoslavo Square. And will be followed by a discussion with the movie's director Alison Kleiman and producer Colin Jones. Thank you, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Please repeat. 8:30.